All right. Good evening and welcome to Winter Training Weekend 2025 We Were There panel. Tonight we'll be discussing recovery, and you're going to have this panel led by moderator Mr. Dario Diaz, our Regional Disaster Officer. Thank you all for joining us and have a good night. Dario?
Thank you, Vicky. It is always great to be part of this series, especially when you're accompanied by amazing individuals. And I don't say that lightly. I actually know each of the individuals here, some for a longer time than others, but we have worked in some capacity together, whether it's from far away, like we were in the deployment together, and one person was over there and the other one was over here. Or hand in hand here in the region, whether it's in my support role as CRDO or literally in the field with each individual here. So thank you, gentlemen, for being here. I'm really excited to talk a little bit about recovery. I think sometimes recovery is one of those areas that sometimes doesn't get talked about enough. We love talking about response, the front end of the house, the actual where people are being supported instantly at the moment as things are happening, but recovery is an important piece. And I'm just going to stop talking and I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself. So we'll start with Mauricio, and I'm going to ask you, Mauricio, is your name, what do you do with the Red Cross, and how long you been involved with the Red Cross?
Hey, my name is Mauricio Serrato. I've been with the Red Cross since 2004, so about 21 years. I am the Regional Client Care Manager for Greater New York.
My name is Chris Kalish. I'm with Disaster Health Services. I've been with the Red Cross. I started in the late 80s as a toddler, and I worked for some time with the Red Cross doing training, CPR, first aid, and so on, and the initial disaster services run. And then took a small sabbatical as life approaches, and then came back about 4 or 5 years ago or so into the disaster services group. So thank you.
I'm Stephen Roberts. I've been a volunteer 26 years, but my family reminds me repeatedly that I'm only halfway to the 50-year pin that my grandfather had. And so it always keeps me humble. I started working with you, Dario, before either of us had any gray.
That's facts. Facts. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Again, I'm really excited to have you here today. Let me start with you, and let's talk about how do you get into this business of helping people in recovery?
So I have a double answer there. My family lived through a plane crash, and we survived by amazing spiritual care. It was unexpected, and I am a rabbi today because of some of it, because I got really great spiritual care after a plane crash. In 1996, I think it was TWA Flight 800 went down, and it was a horrible disaster from the perspective of people showing up and there being no gatekeeping. And then laws got passed, and the NTSB was then responsible. Families went to Washington and demanded disaster mental health and disaster spiritual care. And that was passed off to NTSB. NTSB reached out to the chaplaincy organizations. There were 5 of us. And then, the NTSB reached out to Red Cross. Red Cross reached out to us. And I was in the very first group of people trained. And it's been my way to give back all those years.
Thank you. Chris.
Well, thank you. That's quite a story. I have, I've always done some form of work in volunteering with lots of different organizations, and Red Cross has been, from my early start, has been sort of the pinnacle of organizations that has such a broad range of helping people. And to see, I've worked as an EMT for almost 40 years now, and I've done a lot of clinical work in Westchester County and in other areas. And Red Cross gave me the opportunity to be able to deploy into other areas, help people who are really at the worst point in their lives, a lot of cases, and to be able to in some way make a small difference to people that are sort of on that early road to recovery and just getting over the initial trauma of whatever episode had either caused a disaster or put them in the circumstances that they are now. And so, you know, when I see it now, whether we're doing remote work with clients in the area or if we're deploying on site into shelters or into, you know, congregate spaces, it's very gratifying to be able to provide that small amount of sanity to people and to be able to get people back on their feet again a little bit and start to restore a normal life for them.
Thank you very much, Mauricio.
You know, back in 2004, I was working in facilities in the Red Cross, and I saw responders running towards an emergency response vehicle to get it filled up, and they were going to go out and provide water to some clients. It was because of a blackout. Started asking what are those teams, and a few months later, I started volunteering. My very first shift that I volunteered, I went through a 3-alarm fire about 2 blocks away from Queens Center Mall. We helped 3 families, all Spanish speaking, so I was the only one actually talking to them because I was bilingual. I am bilingual. We wrapped that job up. We went to a building collapse about a mile away in Junction Boulevard. We got back here, it was a 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. shift. We got back here about 9:45 p.m. and right away there was a 3-alarm fire in Brooklyn. We was asked to go, and I didn't get out of here until about 3 o'clock in the morning. That day, when I'd gone through so many jobs, I knew that that's really what I wanted to do, and I really enjoy helping people. I didn't get into the recovery side till years later, but I gone through a lot of phases within the Red Cross, and I think the recovery is where I'm supposed to be.
Thank you, Mauricio. And, you know, you talk about recovery side, right? So we hear the word recovery. I'm going to start with you, Chris, and I'm going to ask you in your own words and from your space in disaster health services, Stefan from your side, the spiritual care, Mauricio from you, in the kind of case management piece of recovery. What does recovery mean in disaster services for you?
Well, in disaster health services, since it's mostly EMTs and nurses and paramedics, we're typically very frontline in terms of working with clients or patients that are acutely injured and in some way being able to restore some stability in terms of medical stability. When I think of recovery, though, and when we participate in things like congregate shelters, recovery has a much broader meaning, and it's not just stabilizing the medical component of the client. It's also being able to get them to a position where they're able to continue some form of normalcy in their lives. And even if it's still within the shelter, some clients don't leave the shelter for many weeks, or end up transitioning into secondary housing for some time just because they've been displaced and their primary housing is no longer available to them. But normalcy can actually start even as early as being in that first acute shelter. When they start to develop relationships with other people in their community that are in the shelter or that are in the hotel or wherever it might be that they're currently recovering, and to actually start to get some sense of being able to socialize again normally, to be able to rebond with their family, to be able to get a good night's sleep and good meals, and to start to socialize with other people in the shelter. And I start to see that in many of the deployments I've been through, and it's amazing to see how quickly people are not only that they transition from that I need help to I want to help others. And I see that quite a bit in the shelters where, you know, you start to see the first stages of recovery when you see individuals starting to help others where they can. And that's an amazing thing to see. And just from a humanity perspective, in terms of how people react to crises like this.
Stefan.
So recovery for me, very similar but different words. Recovery is about helping somebody get grounded. After a disaster, most people, depending on the size of that disaster, we become ungrounded. And I say we because you'll hear later about a number of things I've lived through. And so what disaster spiritual care does is we help people begin to make meaning of a situation they've probably never been in. And in the meaning making, even if there's no meaning, and that's part of it, it at least begins to help them feel grounded. And to me, that groundedness, like you're talking about, is the first step in their ability to go through the life cycle of a disaster. And the, you know, it's we do in disaster spiritual care, our work is almost 100%. No, actually, at this point, it's about 50-50, client facing and working with our colleagues here. When we do a lot of work within Red Cross, because we see horrible things day in and day out. And one of the things that my function does is help us as volunteers make meaning of what we're doing as volunteers. And that to me is a awe, as in the word holiness. It is a holy experience, an awesome experience that I'm lucky enough to be able to have the skills to give back.
Thank you.
You know, I see a lot of our clients right after a disaster, and it's literally within 24 hours. They're still trying to process, and they're still going through shock, and they're still trying to identify the why, the how, and I try to steer them into, you know, it's a disaster. Is this disaster is not just going to be for the first few days, few weeks. Is this is how long your disaster is going to be, you know, and once people start adapting or accepting that, I think that's when actual recovery really begins, because now they get to accept the new normal and begin to actually recover and accept the help, or start talking to other people and take the resources, the referrals, and start acting. But you know, my job is when I see people that they're still trying to understand how did this occur, why, and try to push them into, let's talk about the good things. Let's talk about your family still here. Now we can actually begin your road to recovery, and this is how we're going to be able to help you.
Mauricio, I think you bring into the point. I'm going to connect it to another question, which is talk about the obstacles that people face, right? So in your case, you're talking about people come in and they're having that struggle of understanding why this happened, but also, you know, how am I going to deal with this? Can you walk us through some obstacles that people have to face when dealing with recovery after disaster?
Yeah, for sure. Obstacles, I mean, trying to get people to accept the reality, it would be definitely one, right? Getting people to, in New York City, I would say getting people to understand the resources and how wonderful our resources are within this particular region. The relationships that this region has built with the multiple agencies across our city are really amazing. Trying to get them to accept that if they need help with housing, these are the two resources that we have here in New York City or across the region. Once they learn to accept that, is now how can I get you to qualify for those programs, and you know, let's work on getting you the right documentation so we can get you to talk to the agencies, and they need to be the ones talking to the agencies. That's how they're going to be able to actually accept and recover on their own, is for them to actually do the stuff. My job is really to guide them and to tell them what their next steps are, and then really follow up with them to see how those conversations are going.
So a lot of the obstacles are not necessarily, you know, physical 100%, right? They're also emotional, mental. So Chris and Stefan, how do you, what are those obstacles do you see, and how do you interact with those obstacles? How do you support people overcome the obstacles that come in after disasters?
There you go.
Well, that's absolutely true that there's the physical component of it, which are, and especially I'm talking from the health services perspective. You have a lot of people who are dependent upon different types of equipment and medical devices to be able to lead a normal life, whether they have a chronic illness or they have something that needs to acute treatment. When they're involved in a house fire, they're evacuated somehow from their primary residence, they lose all that. So things that you take for granted, even eyeglasses, sometimes people will leave their eyeglasses inside the home and they have to be evacuated prior to being able to empty out the things that they need on a day-to-day basis. And so those physical obstacles can be real and substantial. And a lot of times we take them for granted that, you know, if you live in a home and you don't require any kind of medical intervention on a day-to-day basis, you don't really think about it. If you're displaced, if you have to go to a hotel, you know, you're going to sleep a nice night there. If you're somebody that relies on a nebulizer or a CPAP device, you know, to help you breathe when you sleep, those are significant challenges that need to be met almost right away. So the physical obstacles are real and they're pretty substantial, especially in the case of health services. The emotional obstacles, like you said, Dario, first of all, they're exacerbated by the fact that those physical devices are no longer available to them. So the panic that you feel if you have severe allergies or if you're an asthmatic, and you might not need to take an inhaler every day or an EpiPen, but the fact that you don't have it, and now you're not in your home, you're not cooking your own meals anymore, and somebody may be in the shelter, we're making meals for them, and they don't know if there's an allergen in there or if there's something that might trigger them. And they have to deal with the emotional state of not knowing whether they're going to be able to treat themselves in that situation. And so I've seen that both in local disasters in greater New York, but also in deployments in California and Florida and so on, where all of a sudden people are separated from their primary residence and all of the things that they come to rely on, and are now in a situation where they're completely void of that. And that could be really quite traumatic for people.
Thank you. Thank you.
So one of the things that disaster spiritual care trains for, we're often in that very first team after DAT to show up. And the very first thing we assess for is exactly what you were talking about. Do they have a place to sleep? Do they have something to eat? And do they have all their medicine? Because until we meet that part of their lives, they can't deal with anything else. If you're hungry, you're not thinking about God, higher power, creator. You're wondering, how am I going to eat? So in our training, that is an essential part, because our first responsibility is referral, referral, referral. And those first hours, making sure that all of that is tended to. And after that, our responsibility is to listen. We may be the only people where they're going to get quietude, and they're going to be able to share their fears. They're going to be able to share their feeling oftentimes that God has abandoned them. God, higher power, creator, the source, however we understand that. And I want to say right up front that disaster spiritual care works with people of all faiths and of no faith. There isn't anyone that we do not work with, because all people have a spiritual life. And we provide silence and reflective listening, deep listening, which grounds people. And the grounding, again, is essential for them to begin the recovery process.
Thank you. And I am sure when you're working with clients, right? Uh, Clients are all different, right? They're all different. They all have different needs. Have been any moments where you actually had to think outside the box in an operation? And if you could tell us maybe that example, any of you want to share?
I'll start because you know. I was a volunteer with Red Cross 2 years before 9/11. And the week before 9/11, Dario and Virginia had approved a full plan for us to go live. Literally a week ago, I still have it on my computer. 9/11 happened. We had just been approved. We had nothing. And part of what we did in the thinking out of the box was thinking, what resources are there available? Who can we reach out to and turn to for help? And once we start thinking about Red Cross being a partner agency, that's thinking outside the box. And that was really important then, to see ourselves as a partner agency and to figure out whatever else we needed. We didn't have to have it inside. We could get it somewhere else.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I had kind of an interesting story when I was in, I believe it was the Florida, one of the Florida deployments for a hurricane. And it was prior to landfall. So that's always a little challenging because you get deployed prior to landfall and it could pass over and absolutely nothing happens. And you're 2 weeks in a hotel in Florida doing very little, maybe doing staff health or something else. Or it could be 10 times worse than you expected. And one of these recent deployments, it was, I believe it was Milton, and it turned out much worse in the area that I was in than we had anticipated. And so we had a shelter that originally started out with maybe 300 or 400 people, and which is fairly large, especially when you're considering that we only had 2 or 3 people from disaster health services. So, you know, you've got a compromised population and you've got 3 people that are kind of spreading their wings, you know, to try to get out there and help people. And all of a sudden flooding started, and what was 300 now became over 2,000. And it was a true crisis. It was really, the shelter was filled up. They had enough food. The school actually managed the shelter more or less, and the county participated a little bit. But we still had the same resources there, and nobody was going in. All the travel was closed off, so there was no additional resources coming. What you had was what you had. There were no additional cots coming. Fortunately, again, we had enough food. But you had so many more people. You had almost 10 times the number of people that you had initially anticipated, for which we were already a little bit understaffed. And so it was quite overwhelming. And so we were just constantly on the road moving. And you always end up tending to improvise in situations like this. You don't really have a choice. You just have to survive it somehow. And one of the things that I found became very helpful is when we first walked in there, I noticed there were a bunch of teenage kids, and they were really withdrawn. They were terrified, but they were expressing it very differently than normally you would see an adult express that. You know, there's a sense of pride, I guess, and you know, teenagers kind of have their own little way of dealing with things. But there was a pool of them, and they were sort of, you know, quarantined themselves in one of the corners, and they were very despondent, and it was difficult for them to really process this. And we were short-staffed, and what I saw was an opportunity to be able to leverage some of those skills and the strength. And all of a sudden, these teenagers became an army of, you know, pushing wheelchairs around and helping people get to dinner and helping deliver food to people's rooms. And it all of a sudden was totally overwhelming. Over a couple thousand people that needed assistance. We had these kids that were doing so much to help, and their attitudes, it just was a complete changeover from when they first got there to when they were, you know, literally deployed. as sort of Red Cross deputies and helping people. And, that it was a little bit of improvisation to sort of, to leverage these kids. But what happened was it ended up really diffusing a very, very difficult situation and helping in so many ways. And these kids, they just ran room to room and they helped wherever they could. And it was just remarkable to see.
Thank you, Chris. That's great.
I started in this role as the client care recovery manager. And when I first started, right, it was really about trying to get people to accept the resources that we have to provide them. Then I started thinking, I was like, okay, people are going into, like, say, a shelter, right? And they're going in there blindsided and not knowing what to expect. And this probably single mother is going in there and she's working, but she's spending all her money in the wrong things, right? And now it becomes a cycle where she's not able to get out of the shelter. So we started we thought about this, and now we put a plan together to actually, one, get them to accept the resource, but two, try to work a plan for them so they can get out of it, right? So we literally sat down with them. We asked them questions. How much money do you make on your job? What is it that you need? How much do you have saved up? Based on all that, we actually put some numbers together for each individual family. Look, this is how much this is how long you need to stay in the shelter. You only need to stay there for 6 weeks. If you save this much every single week, right, you're able to literally get out, get a new apartment, buy brand new furniture, and start all over again. But you have 6 weeks that you have to go through this. And now you're going to ask me, what am I going to do for food and what am I going to do for clothes? Well, I'll get you the resources for food and clothes, but I need you to work this plan. And sure enough, people really started going in there with a different mindset into a shelter where they can just go in there for a short period of time and be able to get out. So.
Thank you, Mauricio. And in some ways, you all have touched on this concept of community, right? Whether it's partnership with other groups or the children working, and being part of that community and being not only part of the community, but actually producing in that community, if I may. One of the things that our president of Humanitarian Service keeps talking about is this concept of community mobilization, which I'm sure you heard of. And the way I like to talk about is look, it's us being part of the community so we can do better in disasters as a team, right? You can explain in many ways, but let's just simplify and say the key is how do we and the community together serve the community better, right? So can you tell me a little bit, how do you see the recovery phase in disaster services being more involved or in tune with this community mobilization model we're talking about in the Red Cross? Chris, if you don't mind, start with you.
Sure. So recovery is an interesting component of where I sit, because again, being an EMT, I'm always kind of like first line. I'm, stop the bleeding, both literally as figuratively as well, in a lot of situations. And so the recovery and transition is always a real challenge. I'm used to, immediately figuring out that assessment and figuring out how to stabilize somebody immediately. And the concept, until I really started doing shelter work with Red Cross, the concept of how to now take somebody who's maybe medically more stable and put them into a situation where they're going to be able to transition into housing, like Mauricio was talking about, is really challenging. And it's different in every community. So New York City has very different plans for how to transition people into more permanent housing than, say, Westchester or Long Island. And so we have all these tools to leverage different mechanisms to be able to transition people into a more stable recovery and long-term housing. And it's tricky. I've had to, again, work on this much more. I've been fortunate that Red Cross has so many resources. And one of the things I noticed when I was in the shelters is that the counties also have that same mandate. And so when people are transitioning and the county comes in and even FEMA comes in, and you have federal workers and county workers and Red Cross all kind of working to work a plan for every single person. And it's very effective. And what I see on the inside of it is more and more people are able to actually leave the shelters, which is obviously the goal that everybody has, is that, it's not as nice as the shelters might be in terms of what we're able to provide, the cots and the blankets and the food and things like that. It's not a long-term place that anybody wants to be. And the fact that there are those resources from, federal, state, and county level, as well as Red Cross, that it's amazing to be able to see that everybody, at the end of the day, everybody in that shelter is able to move somewhere and is able to get on with their lives. And it's very, when I see a shelter close down, it's a really happy moment for me, even though that's where I might be working at the time. But watching it close down means that people have a place to go. And, that's one of the happiest moments that I see, is that it's almost like, okay, our job is done here from that perspective, that this person can get on with a normal life.
Thank you, Chris. And actually, I want to highlight something real quick, as you mentioned. The Greater New York region, the recovery team particularly, was recognized because it's one of the teams that has the most resources for our clients. Something that it was not an accident. It was not something that just happened because it was something intentional that the team, led by Mauricio and others, I lead and others in the team, took the time and said, look, it's important that we actually have these resources and work with the people, and not only have them, but actually sit down and walk through with them. So I want to take that second to give kudos to our regional team, our recovery team, for the great work they've done that. So thank you very much, team.
Yeah. And
I just want to reiterate that when you're deployed, your experience in New York can work against you, because we have so much resources and we know how to access them. When you get out of New York, do not expect what you have in New York, and just be thankful that you're volunteering in New York, because you will see the difference when you head out on deployment.
Thank you, Stephanie.
I was recently deployed to some tornadoes in the middle of the country. I forgot which state it was, right? But we get there, and there were some fatalities within that particular disaster. Our teams were having a hard time trying to get the information of the fatalities. For some reason, our partners were not budgeting into providing that information, and we couldn't reach out to our potential clients to let them know the services of the Red Cross. I reached out to a colleague of mine, Aileen Ramos, right? And I say, hey, we have this document back in our region where we can actually, instead of trying to reach out to get the information, why don't we just provide them a document of the services that we could provide, and let that organization, that sheriff, that hospital, give that to the client. That actually worked really well. And today they're able to have better relations between that particular region, that sheriff, and that hospital. So it's really adapting to new situations and creating those relationships. I think part of recovery is really identifying where our gaps are, and then going and talking to all of our partners, because we're not going to be able to do it alone, and identify those gaps and see what we can actually work together to fulfill those gaps.
Thank you. Chris, I'm going to ask you a question. And I just found this question pretty interesting. How do you balance urgency with equity when helping people with health needs after disaster?
Well, it's an interesting question. It's, and I think that we probably all kind of live this same model. Those two are inextricably linked, right? So when I look at a situation, whether it's a disaster, or even a minor situation where, let's go in kind of my EMT role, where you may have a motor vehicle accident and you've got 5 people that are injured. Equity comes in from the perspective that everybody's viewed through the same lens as we triage. Who's sickest, who needs the immediate help the quickest? And that's where we put our resources. And the same thing kind of happens on whether we're in a shelter or, in a situation where we've got people that are grouped and in the community that are trying to recover. There, it's always a challenge because you don't want to forget anybody that there are a lot of times there are people that are very quiet that are sitting in the corner that are suffering that you don't know about necessarily. But the concept of sort of looking at a very broad picture of where everybody is, what people need, and then provide that service on a needs-based priority list. So, and that's kind of how we do triage always, right? So, somebody with a, who is unresponsive in the corner, right? Regardless of their demographic or what their situation was prior to coming in here, or even whether some of it was things that they may have put on themselves, right? Whether it's drug or alcohol related or that type of thing. Somebody that is in critical condition needs critical assistance, and so as we work through it, at least from our service perspective, we look at that triage brush very, very equitably, and everybody gets the same level of triage, and really understanding what people's needs are, and then servicing the most critical first, and then working our way down.
Thank you, Chris. And again, that connects with our fundamental principles, right? The principle of impartiality, right? Basing our need not on any other component. Thank you, Chris. Stefan, a question for you. You talked about before the Red Cross Spiritual Care serves people of all faith. How do you support people whose faith or worldview has been shaken by disaster? And then how do you do that in also doing it with people from different faiths?
So let me start by just defining what we do and what we don't do. We don't do religious care. We don't provide sacraments. We partner with the community if somebody is in need of sacraments. If somebody needs halal food, I will give you an example of that. We opened up a shelter during Ramadan, and we had a very large Muslim population. And the issue became we had to figure out how and who could do the meal before the fast began. And how did we work with everyone in the shelter about how did we get a meal at the end of the day? That's religious care. We don't do that. We partner. What we do is help people make meaning of their lives at that moment. It's about the spiritual connection. Spirituality is about connection with yourself, with that which is beyond you, however you understand that, God, higher power, creator, and it's about your relationships with others. And all of those at times get broken or get stretched after disaster. And we sit or stand or wherever we are to help people begin to ask those questions. What does this mean to me? How and why did this happen? We never provide an answer. We help them begin to ask the questions. And once you ask the question, you begin to get grounded. We do a tremendous amount of reflective listening. A key part of making meaning is being heard. And just being able to listen to somebody and then let them know they've been heard begins to allow them to feel that they're connecting either with themselves, with that which is beyond them, or with other people. And that's part of what we do in spirituality. And it's a key part of that meaning making.
Thank you very much. That's a great way to connect, right? To spiritual care, which I think sometimes gets misunderstood. So thank you very much. Mauricio, you're somebody who I know, and I will say probably one of the most solid operation person in that I've met, and I know a lot of people in this business. I don't think many people have worked as many disasters as you have, whether it's locally or even deploying out in the country. you came from the operations side, the response side, getting out there, working with the people. How would you describe the difference between leading a recovery team, right? And working directly with people affected by disaster. So how do you describe that difference of being in the front lines and working and leading a recovery team like you do today?
That's a good question. Providing guidance, supporting your team is definitely a way to lead the whole entire team, right? Making sure, so I've been in the side where I get to help a lot of people. I get to interview a lot of our clients. I've gotten to see the different phases of the recovery for our clients. Knowing that I have done all that stuff and really understanding the process of the recovery for our clients allows me to go into an operation now and actually lead the whole entire operation of the recovery side. Talking to all of our IDC folks and of course our intake, our caseworkers, and providing them that guidance or creating those reports or really going out there and talking to community engagement partners and making sure that the resources that are needed for that particular disaster are being, our hands are being shaken and we are creating those particular partnerships for that region that I'm there for. In Arkansas, I think I was there, or Oklahoma, I think it was Oklahoma. Got there and the RCCM, the regional client care manager, was there for, I think it was her first week on the job. And so I get there, I was like, hey, where is your regional client care manager? Oh, she's dealing with local disasters. This is her first week. It's like, wonderful. Won't you bring her in, please? Let's actually work together. Let me show her what it is about how to build recovery, how to build these relationships. What are we gonna do? Because I would like it when I leave out of here that she has a better understanding of this whole entire role. And sure enough, she came in really happy and perpy. And by the time we left, like she actually got to really understand her role. She still teams me from time to time, asking me for guidance and stuff like that. But it's really relying on your whole entire team and letting them lead themselves.
Thank you very much. This is open to all of you. What lessons have you learned from past disasters that could shape future preparedness?
I'm going to jump in, going to answer it slightly different. I've been a 26-year volunteer. I want to talk about some of our longer term volunteers and sabbatical. You used that word. There comes a point when you may need to take a sabbatical. I've done 2 sabbaticals in my 26 years. The first sabbatical was when my home was destroyed by Hurricane Sandy. There's no way I could have done any of the work because I was a client and I had client care that saved me. Disaster spiritual care. It really saved my life, the spirituality. And it's important for us to know when we need a break. Because if you burn out, you can't respond to the next disaster. You just can't. And I took a sabbatical about 4 years ago. I'm very open. I have clinical PTSD from 9/11. And I reached a point after COVID that I was getting overwhelmed. And I had to take a sabbatical so I could focus on me, so I could be here today. And it's really important to do self-care and not to be afraid long-term to take a sabbatical.
Thank you. And I got to tell you, we're happy you're back.
Yeah, I'll just follow up on that. I think that you're absolutely right. I think that's one of the really important things. For me, I sort of accentuated that by taking like a 30-year sabbatical from Red Cross. But that's more because, life happens and you have children and you do your thing, and that's important too. And everybody has a different threshold as volunteers. And we run into this. We have a sort of a core team of health services, nurses, and EMTs in the greater New York area, and we actually pool across the different chapters, and we all scratch each other's backs wherever we can. So we have there are times where people are just, I can't do it this month. I can't take a shift this month, and the team is so robust and willing to help that they backfill, and everybody will take help each other out and pool those resources. And it's one of the really nice things that I see here is that, you're in a team of people, and that team is, kind of all has the same collective objective, which is the client. And whatever needs to be done in order to be able to serve that client happens. So if I have a client, for instance, that I'm in the process of working with, and I have to come down to the city and do a panel, I know that somebody in my team is going to follow up with that client, is going to work with them and get them what they need. And it's just really nice to know that the team is so solid. It's very close, and everybody's kind of got that same objective to be able to help them make sure that things are moving smoothly to serve the clients in the best way that they can.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, it's definitely a team approach. I've been on a lot of operations where we have tried every single operation is totally different. And every single operation, I try to make it better than the last one. So and let's just go a little bit away from recovery. I was doing distribution of emergency supplies, and going out into the community and distributing supplies is one thing. But I took it a step further and actually started knocking on the doors, asking questions. Hey, how's your response? How's your recovery? What is it that you need? Here's the items that I have in my truck. And is there anything else that I can help you with as far as, do you need spiritual care? Do you need mental health? Do you need health services? And we created a form, and we started getting all that information over to all of our IDC teams, and they started going out and providing those services. But a lot of my teams now, they were not coming back happy, right? Because now they were taking in a lot of trauma, right? So I quickly had to go into our mental health side, like, hey, my teams are coming back and they're beat up. I need somebody that's going to come in there and is going to talk to them, make sure that they're okay for the next day. And if they needed a break, let's get you a break. Let's get you to be off tomorrow and come back re-energized the next day, and let's start doing it again. But that's really what they enjoy that deployment so much, because that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to go out there and not just give out items, but really talk to our clients, even though the whole, the trauma they were taking is a lot. And sometimes they would tell me, Mauricio, I had to take a pause for like about 10 minutes and really thought about what the client just told me. And before I can get into that truck and drive away, I had to really stop and for about 10 minutes and take care of myself first. I was like, thank you so much for doing that. And, there are resources here that can help you, prioritize stuff. So.
Thank you, Mauricio, and thank you for bringing up mental health. Right, that's if the three of you were part of a table, the fourth leg would be mental health. Right, the individual disaster care team and the client care team working together, and I think that it becomes a holistic approach. Right, and we see it in the ICC teams, and then we see it in just the working with each other. I mean, you all talked about taking a break. Talk about a break. What we do is not take a break, but what we're going to do is going to switch a little bit of gears, and we're going to open up some questions. And then we're going to have some folks from External Relations help us read some of the questions that have been posted online. If you are online and you have some questions, go ahead and feel free to please add some questions there, and we'll read them here, and then we'll have our participants, our panelists, answer them. So Ned is going to help us out reading the first question.
Sure. I'm going to read this is on? Yeah. I'm going to read a question from Norma, and I'm going to adapt it slightly because I think you kind of touched on self-care and staying energized. So her question was, what keeps you energized to continue to do the work, and what is your own self-care after you've supported others? So I'm going to reframe that a little bit. What are some self-care tips while you're deployed, sort of things that you do on a deployment to make sure that you have the energy to keep doing it and that you want to do another deployment?
I really think what keeps me doing this is the clients. Every single story that we hear is totally different. But when our clients are so grateful for what they have received, it really makes me want to come back and continue to do another deployment, another helping families. Self-care for me could be go back to my shelter, go back to my hotel room and really talk to my family, or watch a TV show and just zone out. That is, or play a video game that I may have on my cell phone. Allows me to literally to just tune everything out and then just come back the next day and refresh.
I was definitely going to say, we encourage people, if they have a routine at home, like if you get up every morning and meditate, that you meditate while on the road. If you take a walk to get connected with nature naturally in your life, we encourage you to do that. We definitely encourage you to pick up the phone and call your family. When you're deployed out of the region, you are ungrounded, call your family to hear their voice. You don't need and shouldn't be sharing details with them, but to hear what they're doing, that's grounding, that's self-care. And self-care can be really broad. You know yourself. If you're a swimmer, and depending on the deployment, there may be a pool. And at that pool, by the way, you may end up meeting people who need our services.
Yeah, those are great points. Unfortunately, I've been in a lot of disasters where either due to the disaster or due to the remote location of the facility, there's no service. So it's very difficult to get time talking to your family, which is stressful. One of the things I like, as far as just general self-care, and this is something that I typically have this conversation with colleagues when we're on site, because it does tend to get a little bit overwhelming and stressful at times. Sometimes like the snow doesn't stop and you're still shoveling, but it's still coming down. And it's very difficult, especially in, acute situations, like whether it's mental health or spiritual care or health services where somebody's, in acute need of assistance. And that keeps happening. And sometimes that can really take a toll on people. And I like to always kind of regroup with my team, whether it's early in the morning at one point where we could just sit down as a team and take a look at the big picture as to what we're doing, who we're serving, and why we're here. And to just stop and to get, remove ourselves from the snowfall for a second, and to try to just have that conversation and realize, who we're here helping and what can we do to make that better. And again, that's why we went here, and that's why we volunteer with the Red Cross. That's why we deploy. We did it because we want to help people. And at the end of the day, we always have to kind of come back to that, kind of overall perspective that's why we're here. And if we're not doing that, then we have to find a way that we're able to do that more effectively within the environment.
So some of this, it depends on what stage of the deployment you're at, what you can do. Those early days, you're working until you drop. But once we really establish a schedule, it's essential to have boundaries and borders. You've got a shift, you better not work beyond it because you're not helping anyone. It is the other thing that I always teach is let go and let God. You are not responsible for everything. And that is essential to know that when your shift is done, you need to turn it over to somebody else, or you need to be knowing it's not your responsibility. That is so hard for us because we're out in the field and we feel this obligation. But for us to respond long-term, it's about setting those boundaries. It's about setting those borders. It's about working shifts. It's about taking a day off. And to do that at times, you just have to let go and let God.
Thank you. Any other questions we have?
Yeah, and it's in the same vein, so I'm gonna reframe it to keep it fresh. Zanara asked, "What is the best me time to reset yourself to avoid burnout and keep going with the mission?" So let me reframe that. Between deployments, between the sort of the local responses, how do you take care of yourself? How do you know when you're ready to go back? How do you readjust back into your non-disaster role? And sort of how do you know when, and Stefan, like you've expressed sort of a very intimate relationship after sort of 9/11, and Sandy, like, how do you know when you're ready to go back, and how do you make sure you have that me time in between your responses?
I knew I was ready to go back when I got excited again about thinking of deploying. So for me, I had lost that excitement. And when I got excited to think about coming back in and helping recruit, the excitement was back and I was ready. That for me and for a lot of other people, after deployment, mental health services, mental health, spiritual care, we encourage you to take a break. You have experienced when the hurricanes, the tornadoes, the floods, it is deeply in your body what you've seen. And there's a need to slowly let it out, to take some time off before you respond again, to be able to say, no, I need another day. Because what we do, as the two of us know, it's not about being a volunteer for a year or 2 years. The question is, how do you get to 21 years? How do you get to 26 years? How do you get to 30 years? And those are the questions you want to ask yourself, because being a volunteer just gives me so much joy and spiritual fulfillment. And that's knowing I've got to say no at times and know when I'm ready to say yes again.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that it tends to be a self-correcting problem in a lot of cases, where if you're not sure that that you're really ready to go back and you don't have that excitement, you probably shouldn't. You should probably wait, and you should probably wait till you collect yourself and you regain that excitement to go back and help people again. And for it's not necessarily something that happens immediately for everybody, and maybe for everybody there's a different timetable on that. But it's one of those things that in self-reflection, there's a point where, where you miss it and you realize that you really want to be out there helping people again. And that's when you should be there. And if you're not enthusiastic and ready to do that, that's the wrong time to do it. And you just should not, frankly, at that point. Don't push yourself. You're not going to do favors to the client, and you're not going to do favors to yourself either. So
I want to add one more thing. You may decide that you can't do some things any longer, and then it's time for you to shift into another department, to do something else. That's okay. To be able to say, no, I can't go into the field any longer because of my PTSD. I just can't. But I am here in New York, and New York, to me, this is home. Anything happens here, I'm just responding to home. And knowing what you can and can't do is essential. If you get burned out in one area, we have so many areas that you can work in, that we need you. Feel encouraged to say no to one thing, but let me see what else I can do.
Thank you very much. Ned, do we have any other questions?
Yeah, we got one more, and it's sort of two questions, so take whatever angle you want. One is, when do you talk about, like when you're deployed, when do you talk about the situation and the pressure to your colleagues and fellow volunteers? And the other flip side of that is, how can you deal with colleagues who you don't feel comfortable or share your concerns? So like working with a team while you're on a response, how do you have that conversation with each other? You know, whether it's checking in to make sure they're okay when they come back from a day, sort of how do you know that line about when you need to intervene and sort of check in on people?
So I'm going to jump in for disaster, for mental health. They're going to be on the job. On our deployments, they're going to be there. It is essential that you know who they are and that they're there, particularly now, we've restructured. They're there for us on deployment. We are their clients on deployment. You needed somebody to talk to, just to talk, listen, go to them. Feeling frustrated? Disaster mental health is a service that is internal at this point. They'd do client work, but in big disasters, we are the clients.
Yeah, I think communication is probably one of the most important things, especially in a situation like this where there's a lot of stress and you've got a group of people who you weren't necessarily familiar with prior to deployment or working with them. I always think it's a good practice, again, to view your organization as a team, and that organization could be as small as, you know, your DMH colleagues or your DHS colleagues, or it could be as large as the entire shelter staff, including clients. But if you don't have the conversations and talk regularly and understand, you know, what is motivating this person to do this or that, and how is it that you can remediate that, it's not going to get better. So that conversation, and it does happen. I've seen it happen on several deployments before, where there starts to be resentment across colleagues, and the worst thing that could happen is that you put up a barrier and you say, I'm just not going to deal with that person. You really need to be able to bring yourselves back together as a team, whether it's just go out for dinner together, have a conversation over just, you know, a nice, light discussion. Everybody's in this for, you know, good reasons, right? Nobody is going to go and deploy, you know, out to California or to wherever it is, unless they're really there to help people. And so you're starting out with a very strong base of commonality that you're all there to help people. And sometimes the only conflict is, well, how do we do that effectively? And that really is a matter of being able to have that conversation within your team.
Thank you very much. This has been a really pleasant evening. I enjoyed a lot. Keep in mind also the mental health folks are locally as well, available to everybody. Again, that's a resource. And we have some amazing mental health and spiritual care volunteers who are very supportive, but our mental health folks are there to support us, as Stefan said. So feel free to reach out when you're going to SASA, even if it's just a local fire that you went to. For me, I always talk about Dottie Breyer will come into my office, and those of you that know Dottie, very calm, and she'll just say, I know you're the boss, but you got to talk to mental health. And it was a pleasant moment for me every time we did that. So thank you very much. I want to thank the three of you. I will call you not disaster service people, not health services, not spiritual care. I'm going to call you three amazing humanitarians who I have the pleasure to know. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for being a panelist. Thank you to Wiki and the response team. Thank you to the external relations team for doing some great work on everything. And then the people online, I'm being told I got to thank the people online. No, definitely thank you for those of you that joined us again. It's always a pleasure being here to learn a little bit more about what we do. I think there's so much that we do in this region. There's so much we do in this organization that it's important to highlight every little component. So thank you all. Yeah.
I just want to make sure we do one thing that talk about the difference between a big deployment, a big disaster, and a small disaster, because I think it's really important. The difference between a big disaster and a small disaster, it's when the local community becomes overwhelmed and can't provide the resources for itself, which means in New York, what other regions consider very large disasters, it's a disaster for our DAT team. And that's important to know because in small disasters, you're not going to see all the time healthcare or disaster mental health, disaster spiritual care. The local community knows how to provide those services. And it is essential to understand that what we in New York consider just an everyday disaster, you may be asked to deploy somewhere else because for them, they are overwhelmed.
No, thank you for adding that. I think that's an important piece, especially for all of us. We have the small disaster, we have the large disaster. So thank you very much. Everybody, thank you. It was a great time. Thank you, everybody.